Hello and welcome to another edition of BTV. I'm Simon J, and tonight we'll be dedicating the next half hour to all things queer literature. We'll explore what the market for queer literature is like, how might this have changed over time and is changing into the future. What exactly are people looking for? We'll explore what might be the barriers encouraging more queer literature to be written, published and read. And to do this, I'm joined tonight by a panel fair, bursting with talent and experience relevant to the topic in hand. We've invited an author, a publisher and a bookseller to join with me. So firstly, please welcome Ashley Seavright, the author of The Shallow End, published by The Clouds of Magellan, which was shortlisted for the Commonwealth Writers' Prize First Book in 2009. And his new book, Walter, is out now. Welcome, Ashley.
Thanks.
Next up is Gordon Thompson. Gordon Thompson himself, a writer, singer, songwriter, and here as our publisher. He started up The Clouds of Magellan, a small publishing house, in 2006, which publishes a select list of books every year, including Australian fiction, poetry and non-fiction. Publications have tended towards spirituality and gay studies, and the focus has been in emerging Australian writers. Welcome, Gordon.
Thank you.
And last, but by no means least, please welcome Crusader Hillis, a writer, editor, curator and producer. In 1991, he co-founded with Roland Thompson the queer bookshop Hares and Hyenas, and they have since presented over 400 queer literature performance events in Melbourne and Sydney, including 20 events to celebrate their bookshop's 20 years in 2012. Hares and Hyenas is now licensed cafe and venue, as well as remaining Melbourne's queer bookshop. Welcome to you all, and thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, Simon.
Crusader, I'd like to start with you, if I may.
Okay.
Just to explore queer literature, what is it people are looking for these days? How's that changed over time?
I'm not sure it's so much that it's changed over time. I think the way that it's being published has changed a lot. There was, back in the 90s, there were heaps of small publishers all across the world, and also there were hundreds of queer bookshops all across the world. We're down to a handful across the world, really. Like, there's very few left in America. There's 2 in Australia, which hasn't changed, which is great news. But there's very, very few publishers now that are taking a chance on new emerging younger writers. And the bigger publishers, they want to sell at least 2,000 or 3,000 copies minimum. They usually go for about 5,000 before they think they're going to take on a writer. So it's a tough world out there for writers, and so for readers there has been a little bit of a shift in terms of how much is available for them out there.
So why do you think that change over time has taken place? You mentioned hundreds of bookshops, and now there's just...
Economics. I mean, things in America, it was very much the publishing hub of the world in so many different ways, even more so than England in lots of ways, particularly in the queer world. And other things have also shifted. People are spending probably more time on social media. They can get e-books as well, because that's become an affordable way of doing it. But I think mostly it's about economics. The publishers started to recognise that they were in fact supporting a lot of writers and were not making the money that they needed to make to be able to keep going. And you're starting to see big publishers like Random and Penguin are about to merge. So there's a lot of changes that are continuing to go on in publishing, big and small.
Do you think the same demand is there? Is it?
Look, people are probably reading less. The lesbian writers, women readers in general, probably constitute a big part, for instance, of Hares and Hyenas business. And the lesbian romance and detective and things like that are still sort of being pumped out at a really, really high rate, and they're still being read in a very fast rate. But I think there's probably been a slowdown in some of the literary stuff, but then when they do come along, they're so brilliant that they sell well. So,
and talking of brilliance, Ashley, perhaps I could ask you, how did you find the experience of writing your first queer piece of literature and the process to getting published?
Well, it was interesting. I mean, I wasn't thinking about so much the publishing of it or the audience it might find. I guess I was just thinking about the story and writing the story that I wanted to write. It turned out to be very full of gay content. Lots of sex and lots of pran pool and all that sort of stuff. But I didn't think very much about what the audience would be. And then when it was published, I guess it got a huge amount of support from queer newspapers and queer radio and queer bookshops and things like that. So I saw that it did fit into that niche, obviously. But stupidly, I didn't think about it to start with.
Yes, and you also won the prize as well.
Shortlisted for the prize, yeah.
Right.
Didn't win it.
Oh, you didn't win it, sorry.
Didn't win it, no.
Right.
But it was great, yeah, that was
helped.
incredible. Yeah, it did help, yeah. It did help, but it didn't sort of get it off the gay shelf, I suppose. You know what I mean? In Borders, I remember you would go into Borders and take it from the gay shelf and put it on the Australian literature shelf. But next time I came back, it was always back in the gay shelf, you know.
Right. So that's the problem in itself. It just gets sort of pigeonholed.
It did in some stores, yeah, but not in all stores. Yeah.
And Gordon, as a publisher of not just queer literature, but why did you particularly pick this book up? And
He ambushed me. Oh look, no, because you read material and the quality shows through. At the moment, we've just sort of started an open submission policy. So if anyone's out there who wants to sort of send in material, we are open for business. But the material that comes in, the bad stuff marks itself quite easily, and the brilliant stuff sort of demonstrates its quality fairly, early on, and they're the ones that you really want to work with. And so Ashley's work is, scintillating. It's great, and so that was an easy choice.
right. And is there plenty of material coming through to you?
Look, it's starting to. Before that, we just sort of use our own intelligence to pick up things, and you find writers, perhaps, that you've heard of, if you've read the material, and then you sort of talk to them about what they want to do. So the first book that we published really was, at least in the non-fiction area, was Michael Kelly's book of essays on being queer and Catholic, and he'd been writing those for The Age and Sydney Morning Herald for about 8 or 9 years, and so he had a profile, so we made a collection from that. Yeah.
And what sort of inspired you to set up a publishing house that specialised in spirituality and gay literature?
I don't know. I forget. It was a long time ago. Because I think essentially my relationship with Michael Kelly and the interest in his work, and then we were publishing that, and then from that, other works come in, and you meet other people, and so from there, I met Victor Marsh and published his work on Isherwood, and meeting Ashley, and once you start doing that, and then you sort of people start filtering their way in. So
Thanks, guys. We'll be right back after a few short messages. Stay with us, and we'll be back after the break. Welcome back to BTV. This evening we're talking about all things queer literature. We have an author, a publisher, and a bookseller with us this evening. Next section, I'd like to just ask about what might be the barriers to encouraging more queer literature to be written, published, and sold ultimately. Actually, how did you find the process? Did you experience any barriers to getting your book published?
Not to getting it published, no, but as I sort of mentioned before, I think it was about the perception of it in the marketplace, perhaps. I think that one of the big barriers, though, about getting queer literature out there is that it tends to be, I guess, a little more in the mainstream publishing now too. Like, I mean, some of the authors you may have considered to be queer in the past are sort of publishing in a much more mainstream kind of way. I'm thinking about Alan Hollinghurst, perhaps. Some of his stuff. It still has queer content, but it's not looked at as a queer publishing. It's looked at as more mainstream publishing. So I think that might be one of the barriers to getting real solid, full queer literature out there.
I think that's always been the case, though, in publishing. It's been ever since it's started. It goes back to Capote and back even before him and Gore Vidal. There's always been sort of queer writers are quite happy to do quite a lot of queer content and get it into the mainstream, and it sits really nicely in the mainstream. But in terms of the barriers about the fact we're not getting that sort of super queer life, we're not getting enough trans stories, for instance, we're not getting enough around intersex life, and we're still probably not getting enough about the diversity of lesbian life as well, because they're not quite getting into the mainstream in quite the same way as a lot of the bigger name gay male authors have over the years. Although we've got Jeanette Winterson and Emma Donoghue and a few people like that are making it. Yeah.
So sort of market pressures then, I guess, if there isn't the demand and people don't produce it, is that?
Look, I think it's always been a complex thing. There's nothing particularly generic about the sort of writing that's out there by queer writers all across the world, but I think sometimes publishers, you just need a good editor publisher to fall in love with the book, and then they publish it, and then it's interesting that it does become a really personal relationship with a piece of writing, which is what Gordon was talking about before, and it happens in surprising ways. Things pop up that you just don't expect to be on a mainstream shelf,
I don't think there's any kind of machine which sort of generates it or a formula, because as Crusader says, like if you find a work and love it, then you'll get behind it. But then that's necessarily reflecting the taste of the publishers. And so if you have a smaller net of publishers, and certainly publishing houses have reduced in number, then the kind of works that are being selected, perhaps they show the taste of the particular publishers. And there's been a lot of stuff recently about how all the books being reviewed are by male writers, and all the prizes are going to the male writers, and that's trying to be corrected. So certainly there's all these little sort of hidden things, these subtle things which come into to dictate that.
And look, with things like The Age being one of the only places that are reviewing books, it gets down to one editor's point of view about what's going to be reviewed in The Age, and it's been fairly stultifying and fairly limited now for quite a long time.
In fact, we felt like we've got to dedicate Ashley's next book to the reviewer. You sort of, just in the hope that they might, who trashed the last one. So in the hope that he might sort of be more sort of positive this time.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to work.
Oh. How did that make you feel?
It was, to be honest, it felt fantastic to be reviewed in The Age. I was actually really excited about it being reviewed in The Age. The fact that it was
It wasn't
crappy
completely
review.
trash. There were some things in there that weren't too bad at all.
It wasn't so bad.
Probably
pretensions to literature was quite good.
At the end of the day, it's one person's view.
Yeah.
As well. I guess they just happen to have an audience that lots of people can read what they think. I guess. So, if for anybody out there who might be watching, who's I've got a story bursting. I want to do. How would they go about it?
Well, what I'd suggest firstly is they just start getting it down in writing. They use the places that are around, like the Writers Victoria, which has manuscript assessment. That they start coming along to literary events and they start mixing with other writers. Like Hares and Hyenas run them, 3 times a month. And it's a really good place to actually start developing your work. You need to have your work really well developed before you hit a publisher, unless you've really got a great thing in your drawer.
I would agree. I think that the thing that a lot of people do is talk about a great idea and just not write it. You've got to just write all the time. I think write it, and not talk about it.
So certainly one of the solutions there is like a community response, where you sort of become part of a community of writers and readers, and you become a reader yourself, and that's where the bookshop comes in, rather than sort of sitting in a sort of tower of your own sort of dreams.
So the workshops that you run.
We don't run workshops. We actually run like writing nights where people come along and they read their works in progress. And what we find is that you really start seeing incredible change in people's talents and their capacities over time just by coming along and practicing it and, getting the feedback and taking it. Other people need to just be in the room and do it.
That's true.
So they're open to anybody?
They just get in touch with the shop and they say they want to read a piece. Ashley's doing some, I think, in January.
What other advice that people might have?
Writing courses through the CAE or the TAFE. Just start plugging into something like that. Start a writing group.
Sleep with a publisher.
That's not going to have any effect. But like I said, Clouds Magellan is open for submissions, and that covers queer literature as any sort of genre piece. But again, we're looking for the quality, but we're open to sort of read anything. And in fact, as well as publishing, we do a lot of reading and consulting and just talking with authors and reviewing manuscripts for them, as just part of what we do.
And so would they find that through your website?
Yeah.
Clouds of Magellan website.
Magellan.
Sorry. And so, in terms of go back to the Shallow End when you first had the idea, what was the process? How long did it take to get to the point where you actually published?
I can't even remember. I mean, I have a lot of time off work every summer, and I just write during summer. And I can't remember, to be honest, how long it took, because there were a whole lot of different books and stories that I was writing during that time. But it's nice to just have summer off and stay at home and write.
So the advice might be to take the summer off.
Take summer off,
yes,
and stay at home and write.
Join one of the workshop sessions, the reading session, sorry, at the bookshop, and submit to the Clouds of Magellan.
There you go, done.
Easy.
The process
It's too easy.
We've removed all the barriers. Lots more. What areas of queer literature do we need more of?
Well, the thing that I think is becoming much, much more popular is memoir and autobiography. I think a lot of people are starting to recognise that lives well told are really interesting to other people. And it is the thing about them being well told and really about sort of bringing a point of difference. But there's some amazing stories out there that are starting to get written. What do we need more? I think we need some really strong literary fiction in the trans and lesbian and more in the gay male area as well. And I think we probably also need quite a bit more history as well.
Okay. All right, thank you. Well, we're just going to take another short break with some messages, and we'll be right back with some more discussions on all things queer literature. See you soon. Welcome back to BTV, where tonight we're exploring all things gay literature with Ashley, our author, Gordon, our publisher, and Crusader, our bookseller retailer from Hares and Hyenas. Final section of tonight's show, I'd really like to ask you, on a very personal level, what's some of your favourite pieces of gay or queer literature, should I say? Maybe the sort of part they played in your lives, some particularly personal experiences, and essentially what's the must-read for our audience? Crusader, maybe I can start with you.
Well, what I'd like to start with is what has been probably the most influential book in Australian gay publishing circles is Holding the Man. Not necessarily like the most influential for me, but it's the one book that when people come in and they want another book like it, it's impossible to find it, because it has had an enormous effect on people who would not normally read, I think, which is, you just can't overestimate how important that book has been in terms of sort of like really capturing something about everything to do with sort of like growing up, love, HOB, the lot. For me, Samuel R. Delaney's The Motion of Light and Water, which was an autobiography, basically because he sort of taught me about the fact that no matter what you say about happened in your life, if you do the facts right, you're going to find out you're actually telling either porkies or you've actually just got a little bit wrong, that you're always going to be slightly out. So that, memoir writing and autobiography is fictional. And then that takes me into Jeanette Winterson's recent memoir, which is Why Be Happy If You Can Be Normal, which was really one of the standout books for me lately.
And when did you first read Hold the Man? Was that...
I read Holding the Man before it was released. The Penguin sent us a copy, and we have sold several thousand copies of it since 1994 when it was released, or 95. So that's amazing. Yeah. We still sell a few copies a week.
Oh, wow.
It's amazing.
It's fantastic.
Why has it captured the imagination?
Look, it's so honest about, it's written by somebody who's dying at the time. It's so honest about everything, and it's warts and all, and there is so much human story in there about a love affair between, two people who met at high school, and then their whole journey through this sort of like whole sort of AIDS stuff leading up to the early 90s. And it's just a remarkable love story, and it's a remarkably touching and beautiful story that's written with real honesty. So,
Gordon.
Look, I like anything by Derek Jarman, like his writing as well as his filmmaking, and I just like the insight into the culture that brings.
Right. I always remember Derek Jarman's Blue was kind of left me a bit...
Blue?
The movie, the film, just the blue screen for however long. But didn't quite understand that one.
Yeah, but that's his challenging nature. He was always doing things which are kind of sort of challenging and energetic, and that was great. And his personal writing is good. His poetry is not so good, but his general writing is very interesting.
Actually, apart from the shallow end, of course.
Which is brilliant, of course.
Yeah, I was meant to say that.
Thanks. But no, for me it was probably Ellen Hollinghurst, The Swimming Pool Library, which was published, I think, in the mid-80s sometime.
89.
Was it 89? And I remember reading that when...
Might be 87.
87. I remember reading that when I was a young kid, or not a kid, but a teenager in the country, and I had no understanding of gay life or anything. I was very naive, and I was very sort of isolated, and it was just a real eye-opener. It's quite a sexy story as well. I had no idea about this sort of life, and I thought that's what would be my life, very sort of gentlemanly, sort of poof sort of life, which is what all of his stories are kind of about. But yeah, it was really full on. I remember just thinking it was wonderful. I don't know how I got hold of it to be honest, but I remember giving it to Mum and Dad to read. I was so excited about it. I asked them later on, I said, did you enjoy it? And they said, oh, it wasn't my kind of book. So there you go. But I loved it. It was brilliant. And I reread it just recently, and I still think it's a brilliant book, yeah.
And did you find that in the library? Was it in the local?
I don't remember. I bought it. Must have been at a bookshop, I guess.
Oh, and that was
But I just picked it up just randomly, yeah.
Did it enable you to have the conversation with the parents?
Yeah, pretty soon after that, I guess.
Yeah.
Look, it's also amazing how important books are to teenagers, and we see it again and again when kids come into the shop. And we've had, because we've been there 21 years now, we've had people who were coming from when they were 12 or so, who are now in their early 30s, that have had that history. And just watching the books they gravitate to early is really quite an important thing as a bookseller, to help people find that right book and to have that experience.
I think it's very important for young people to see, you know, their possible future reflected in culture and in literature.
And there's masses of young adult books now for queer kids.
Oh, really? Right.
Masses.
Oh, that's good. That's good to know. And what are some of the ones that's selling like hotcakes? Which would you recommend?
Look, I wouldn't be able to say straight away. The supernatural, the unnatural, sort of like Vampire One series, which I can't even think of who the author is. It's
So it's like Twilight for queers?
Yeah, Twilight for queers. But look, there's everything from the Ivan Coyote, who's sort of a really great writer from Canada, has written a fantastic new book of stories which sort of deal with everything from sort of gender sort of diversity to sort of being tomboy in Canada to sort of all these other things as well. Like it just covers the gambit, and it even like the Alex Sanchez stuff now are sort of talking about boys who have got girlfriends and boyfriends, and so there's a whole sort of fluidity thing that's also starting to happen in young queer literature, which I think is really mirroring what is the experience of a lot of younger queer people these days. They don't just see themselves as being gay, lesbian, blah blah blah. They're just fit. They just you know, just do what they want to do and hang out with who they want to hang out with.
I was just thinking about Ashley's story, Crusader. Thinking back, was there a book that you can remember way back that suddenly went, wow?
Yeah, it was called "Tell Me How Long the Train's Been Gone" by James Baldwin, and my sister lent it to me when she was about 19, and I was about 12 or 13, and it was a very full-on sort of African-American gay bisexual story by the same person who wrote Giovanni's Room, and that just very much affected me, I think, in a really positive fashion, to sort of think that, you know, there's people out there that I could find interesting in that particular way.
So just in conclusion, maybe we'll just run through the must-read, the single must-read books from each of you again for anybody who's listening. Crusader, your must-read.
All right, look, the must-read at the moment, I'm going to change everything and say it's by a fellow called Abdallah Tay, and it's called Arab Melancholia. That's my must-read at the moment.
Arab Melancholia.
Yeah.
Right.
The Woodlanders by Thomas Hardy.
I might go for, is it Philip Henshaw? The King of the Badgers, which was, I think, last year.
Yeah.
And that was brilliant. That was an absolute must-read.
Well, thank you very much, guys. Ashley, Gordon, and Crusader. There you've got a few books to go away and find. Obviously, Herons and Hyenas, we'll be stocking them all. Of course, Ashley's own book, The Shallow End and Walter. Thank you very much for joining us on BTV and with our look into all things queer literature. We'll see you next week.